if you could gather, we have our panel now. Please assemble, please go back to your seats. And put the seat belt back on. So I will wait a couple of minutes before starting with you guys. We have 4 of those, right? Okay, that's good. All right. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are starting the afternoon session, and the afternoon session will be started with a little panel of 4 of our guests over here. Some of them already spoke. And the panel will be about, I don't know if it will be displayed here, but it will be about safety, security, and ethics in virtual reality. I will moderate the whole thing, and we will also allow for questions for the audience. So the idea is that I will pose a general question, and then you can give statements, and then we will hand it over to you guys so that you are involved as well. So this is interaction. Don't hide away. And yeah, without further ado, we will start. So we have our 4 panelists over here. I did something very modern. I asked ChatGPT 01 Preview, so the new AI model, to give me a couple of good questions for this particular theme of ethics and in virtual reality. And I would say it came up with a couple of interesting ones. For example, the first one that I had selected for today is about safety measures in virtual environments. Virtual environments can sometimes expose user to harassment and abusive behavior. What measures can be implemented to create safe and respectful environments for all users? I guess that you guys all probably, especially you, have made have some thoughts about this already, and I will just probably hand it over to you, Anthony, to start for this first question round.
Hello. Hi. So I'm Anthony Steed from University College London. I spoke just before lunch. So I will pick something which hopefully the others won't also speak to, which is if you want to create a safe space in a metaverse, the main thing is to educate users about what metaverses are and what virtual reality is. So this is something I didn't mention in my talk before the lunch. But one of the things I'm really interested in at the moment is in people's experiences of social VR and metaverses when they are experts and when they're not experts. Partly because a lot of what our results on our experiences that we report today are with people who are naive about the systems. But if that's not going to be that common for much longer, and I'm interested in what education would be required for these users. So if you wanted to make a safe space, I'll give you one example which somebody else used earlier, which is if you can change somebody's representation as a body, we know what that means from embodiment. Right? So we know that you can change somebody's perception of themselves by changing their body. If you force somebody to change body, which I alluded to in my talk, then if I know that that's a thing and that my body might be changed, I can be educated about that so that I know it's not a thing. So at the moment, I think we're surprising a lot of people by pointing out that that's possible. And a bit of education about what's possible in VR, what's different, will go a long way into at least training people, making people understand. And it's the same type of training that you might give that my teenage children had about going online. It'll be, though, we just need the same thing for virtual reality and metaverses, and we need to get better at explaining what we're doing.
Okay, then.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went first because it's probably going to improve my response. Initially, the question highlighted how to create safe and respectful. And I was planning to highlight that those are different concepts, and one might be much easier than the other, at least to define. But based off of what Anthony was saying, I agree that we need to do more collectively to understand what is the relative equivalence of what takes place in virtual worlds and non-virtual worlds, particularly with regard to things like harassment. Because something like rape in VR, and actually which is even reported in the 90s in text-based environments, maybe in some of the earliest cases, for some people it's exactly equivalent and thus should carry the same type of legal consequences. But for others it's irrelevant, it's impossible, it cannot happen. And the truthful answer is probably somewhere between the two, probably shading somewhere closer to full equivalence because of the embodied aspect and kind of the instinctive reaction you have to things that even though you know this is not really someone striking me or someone harming me, but I'm still having kind of an instinctive reaction to it because I understand that is kind of the contextual intent. But as a society, we haven't even really begun to define what is that equivalence with regard to social consequence or legal consequence. And that speaks to education and an awareness and acceptance that there is some equivalence. And I think in non-virtual, non-embodied VR sense, like in Facebook, things like bullying and harassment is starting to become more clearly legislated, but we're probably not fully there yet, and that's still much more well understood than what takes place in virtual worlds.
Okay, then let's
Okay, so I introduce myself. I'm Patricia Barngrover from Paderborn University, professor in IT security, and I'm not an expert in VR, so I'm very excited to be here. But I have been working on brain-computer interfaces, which we have seen coming up and very related. So I want to relate the question of privacy, of abuses and harassment to the potential inclusion of brain data collection in virtual reality. And there we can see, for example, that we can be exposed to new types of abuses. So for example, if I'm out of a virtual reality environment, let's say I'm in a social network and I decide not to like a specific post because I know that would be signaling my sexual orientation or my political orientation, and I explicitly don't want to give that information. But now imagine I'm in the virtual world and there I'm being monitored with my electroencephalogram activity, and the experience introduces the creator some stimuli that can trigger brain reactions that give away that very same information that I wanted to conceal, so my sexual orientation, whatever, and I'm not even aware that I'm reacting to that. So that could be subliminal stimuli, and I'm not even aware. So I also agree that we need more education, and especially now that we have these new types of sensors and new privacy threats, and more comprehensive ethical guidelines to deal with this.
So hello everyone, my name is Mhaidli, a junior research group leader at Max Planck Institute for Security and Privacy, where I study the harms and ethics of new technologies. So to answer this question, there are I could point to a few little things that companies have either talked about or already thinking of doing, right? So having barriers so that people can virtually get close to you, or there's things like that. There's monitoring voice chat and making sure that people can't shout horrible things at you. But I think maybe more broadly, what I would say is one of the problems of virtual reality is that on the surface, I think for many companies, they could try to say, oh, it's like online systems, but bigger, larger, different. And they'll try to use some of the same techniques that they think work on Instagram or Facebook, whatever, and try to just copy paste them into VR. And the problem with VR is that it's not just a slightly faster or slightly different version of existing forms of social media. It's a completely different thing, right? In terms of how harassment is felt, in terms of how you feel, how your brain processes the information of being in VR. They are two very different things. And so I think what we need to be careful of is not just, we can learn from what has been done in online systems, but we can't just assume that they're going to work. And we need to come up with a new system, and sort of going back to ideas that were alluded before, maybe treat not virtual reality as internet plus, but treat virtual reality as reality plus, and try to see what we do not in online spaces, but what we do in real life situations, and apply those lessons.
Okay, Before we start the round with the audience, I just want to ask a quick follow-up question, kind of. So do you also think that we need, aside from the education and the additional getting experience with that environment, do we also need political or new political policies that guide us in that regard? So, for example, I remember we had a Second Life here a couple of times. I was talking about it, Anthony was talking about it. There were cases when people would get children's avatars and they would have some kind of sex play with others, all adults, but using avatars that looked like children. Is that something where we would need also some way of regulation that would basically prevent that, or what's your take on that? Maybe we can go the other way around back for this question.
I mean, ideally, yes. I think ideally there would be rules in place that decide what can and can't be done in virtual environments. Maybe it's my own cynical side. I feel the way, unfortunately, legislation is usually very slow to catch up. Like, legislation has barely got control of the current social media landscape, so by the time it learns about all the harms that can be done in VR and things like that, then it might be too late. But with that in mind, I think that's where platforms play a really large role, because they have the expertise in terms of they build these virtual environments. They also have the knowledge, the know-how, and usually the flexibility and quickness to be able to respond to problems in VR as they appear. The problem is, how do you get the VR platform providers to have incentives and or create the necessary legislation? But long story short, I do think you're going to need legislation, because I think past evidence has shown that without regulation, you're going to have the wild, wild west, and people are going to do whatever needs to be done. So yes, we need regulation. Part of me hopes for, but is cynical that governments can do it. And part of me wants to, but I don't know how to incentivize companies to do it.
I couldn't agree more. So I think also regulation is needed if we want to save space. And coming to the collection and usage in a harmful or potentially harmful way of brain data in these environments, there are already some initiatives. There is a Neuro Rights Foundation that is pushing for new human rights that protect our mental privacy, mental integrity, because there are also brain-computer interfaces that can modify and act on your brain. So all of these, I think, need to be considered not only from the regulation perspective, but also in broader ethical guidelines and support to developers to take them into account.
I hear a lot of people sometimes saying there's a virtual world act and it's coming soon, and it's not. and to be honest, no one wants it. But there's this fear or hope that is coming. But I would actually, I mean, I'm deeply cynical about regulation of what takes place socially. Because I remember AltSpace, before Microsoft bought it, when it was a place where queer communities from around the world could meet in a virtual world, when they were illegal in their own country. And we're living in an age where that internet of like free and decentralized and unregulated, and that's in the past. We're well beyond that, where we have nation state executing control, and we're kind of hoping that it now comes to, at this early stage of virtual worlds, or the metaverse, what you want to call it, again, this type of national regulation, which we want to preserve, that the virtual world looks like the non-virtual world for us, the way we hope that it does, we idealize it. And I'm a little cynical, to be honest, of that, because I think that it evolves. And speaking to the space of regulation, once you outlaw something, when society starts to evolve faster than the regulation catches up to say that what was illegal 20 years ago now maybe shouldn't be illegal anymore, and it should be permissive in virtual spaces, which are going to be more reliant on regulation allowing it to happen than non-virtual spaces, where we have a lot more freedom to perhaps to be without needing a platform to make it possible for us to be there. So I'm in the middle, but sharing a little bit more too, I'm quite cautious about regulation coming in at the state level.
Anthony?
Okay. 3 points quickly made, hopefully. The first is lots of things are already illegal. So I've been involved in a couple of debates around harassment in VR, and some of these things are illegal already under existing acts. There are specifics which may not be, but lots of things are already illegal. The second is that there is definitely some gaps in very specific things that aren't necessarily specific to VR, such as eye tracking and neurology. Eye tracking is sort of foregrounded by the fact that it's in headsets but not available to the programmers at the moment. And that's because people are probably slightly anxious about it. Also because you don't want to know what goes on inside the eye tracker to make it work. It's not doing a very good job. Don't quote me on that. But also that it would be revealing. But you can imagine, why aren't there eye trackers on posters in the real world, right? You can imagine that could be something that could be a follow-up to the AI Act, right? So in the EU context is monitoring people remotely. And some of the brain imaging can be done remotely, right? So you can do some of it without contact. So maybe as that becomes feasible, it'll become illegal. Or at least it'll get added as amendment. And the third thing is really a positive thing. I see lots of opportunity for legislation that makes these things accessible. So I've recently been in a workshop and talking about the future of accessibility of these things, where legislation will come and help in a very positive way. You can imagine that if, for example, it becomes normalized to use VR for interviewing people for certain roles, that it should then be accessible to the general public, right? To the broadest sense, like 99% of the general public, not the 80% or so on that can easily access the Quest or some other devices. Don't quote me on the 80% either, because I'm sure Meta's very concerned about access to its headsets and whether or not the general public can use them. But certainly some people can't use them. They can't physically use them because of the shape of their eyes, their head, or their ability to hold the controllers or something like that. So I can see some access there, and then technically that'll come through probably my favorite thing, which is making the VR system itself more open so that other people can build accessible interfaces on top of it. So I think a positive thing to round out the sort of negative things.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a fifth microphone for the audience? Or okay, because then I would hand the questions to the audience. Okay, you have it. Okay, great. Then it's open now for you guys to ask questions or follow up on what was just said.
Yeah, thank you so much for these very interesting points. I'm especially interested in privacy in regards to BCI, eye tracking, body language print. So for me, VR and social VR is like a two-sided sword. Like on the one hand, I want the perfect immersive experience with eye tracking, full body tracking, everything I want. But on the other hand, I'm uploading a data print of mine to any headset manufacturer, any social VR platform, which knows more about me than myself know. Like by eye tracking, you can search if I'm addicted, if I'm bipolar, if I'm like whatever health risks I have. And so, yeah, it's hard to phrase that as a question. So for once, I would be interested in your ideas how to get like a global regulation on that. How can we like make Chinese headset manufacturers promise us not to use Westerners' data? And in case if that's not possible, I'm wondering if there might be ways of like camouflaging one's own data sets. Like in real life, you wear like a hoodie and a reflecting scarf and sunglasses to evade facial tracking in public spaces. So maybe something like this is possible in digital realms too.
Okay, who wants to answer first?
I mean, maybe I'll just say
Okay.
about that last question. When I was at South by Southwest most recently, someone did propose that could be a practical use for generative AI. Is just basically a noise generator about your data, making it harder for anything to kind of stick to you consistently. But I don't know, honestly, practically how that could work in an immersive experience, because you would still need to be visual to other people in a consistent and way. So I don't know in that context how it would work. But one thing that came to mind as we were talking a moment ago is that what stops a laptop manufacturer with a webcam from utilizing, recording you while you're watching YouTube, is that YouTube, well, no, but aside from you blocking it, it doesn't typically happen, and it's because these are different businesses. So I think maybe vertical integration of headset manufacturer and the store and some of the applications itself, actually, and then that having another business, which is an ad-driven business, that actually might be the source of the problem, and having some requirement to break them up. Because actually you mentioned the Chinese headset manufacturers, and HTC, I think a lot of people maybe prefer it historically. I know original Vive is still my favorite headset. And one of the things that makes me trust an HTC headset more than a Meta headset, which I use, is because HTC is small, super small. They're barely surviving. They have, I think, very little capability to exploit that data. Not that they wouldn't want to, but they just practically, I don't think they can do it. That makes me trust them more in that sense.
Okay, anyone else? Okay.
Just point out that the GDPR has some teeth, right? So if you collect that data, it should be, and you're going to use it, then it should be explicit how you're using it. So that's what I mentioned about the second point I made, is that there are laws about this, and GDPR is one of them. So if you're gathering eye gaze data, you should have the right to delete it, right? That's because it's about being British. We still signed up, by the way.
So I would like to add to your concerns. We ran a study. Well, I think one important thing to do is to first ask the people what do they find acceptable in terms of data sharing. So we did a study with almost 400 participants, asking them in which cases neurodata was acceptable to share. And I could highlight two observations. So the first one was universally, it was unacceptable that this data is used for marketing. Then people were very fascinated about learning about themselves. So them learning about themselves, not the others, as you mentioned. And then the second thing is consent was a driver towards higher acceptability in data sharing. And so it's very important to have this covered. In the GDPR, as you mentioned, this is one of the requirements, right? But then how to make that meaningful. If we have privacy policies for now eye tracking neurodata, blah, blah, in VR, it's unmanageable already. So how do we make that informative, meaningful for users so they can take this action to remove their data, to consult their data, and do it in an easy way? So I think that's very challenging. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, very good question. I think one thing to keep in mind, not to add more fears on the privacy things, is the issue, like you alluded to, is not just the data they collect, it's what they can infer from that data you may not even be aware, right? So there's a study that showed like 5 minutes of moving in VR is enough to identify you. So I have like your data, your data, your data, just 5 minutes of moving, I could say you're this person, you're that person, whatever. And you could imagine it saying like, can I combine how tall you are with how your arms move in order to be able to tell your occupation? I don't know if I have any concrete solution magical bullets, but I think one thing could be kind of this idea of like separating different manufacturers, and like, so it's not just the same company that makes the headset, like you alluded to, is the same one that processes the data, the same one that sells it, and kind of going along that, because what that could allow is maybe levels of abstraction. So maybe if you have something that measures your eye tracking data in order to tell whether you're looking left or right, maybe the exact data that gets passed on from like one component to the next is not all of the eye movements. It's just like, I just need to know whether the user's looking left or right, so I'll just pass on left or right. And I think by separating out who is in charge of what process, you're able to do that. And so maybe not passing in every single data, but what's the bare minimum I need to get from this data, and passing that instead.
Okay, thanks everybody. Let's see if there are other questions from the audience. Art.
Thank you. I was wondering if any of you think that there should be restrictions against like what kind of avatar, what kind of avatar you embody in VR and the kind of interactions you have with artificial agents. If there are no other humans involved, just bots and you yourself, whether that should be regulated, and if yes, for what reason?
Yeah, I think that is a very good question, because, what if you have an avatar playing? Let's do the same scenario as I had before. An avatar that is controlled by a bot that pretends to be a child in a sexual situation or something like that, something unacceptable in our society, but where actually no real children are harmed. Is that something, is that going, okay, I interpreted it right, okay, then I will give it to you guys. You all look skeptical.
Yeah.
Maybe I should use another, I just wanted to have...
I think that's like a very difficult question to answer. I think like my instinct, I think in a logical sense, is to say, if there's no one else involved, then it's almost like you being alone with your own thoughts. Like, I don't know if there's anything that, well, A, how can it be measured, and B, can it be done? I think what would be for me like one deciding factor would be almost trying to see what is this impact on my own brain and my own psyche. Like, we've known for a while, like, there's all these arguments about playing violent video games makes you more violent. That's been kind of disproven from my understanding. But in VR, it's a different thing. And in VR, because there are studies that have shown that if I do something in VR, my brain records it as a memory, versus if I do something in a PC game or whatever, it's like differently encoded. And so part of me wonders, like, if I do crimes or whatever in VR, does that make me more likely to do things in real life? And so going back to this idea, like, if I commit pedophilia in VR, does that make me more likely, more accepting of it in real life? That would be, for me, like, one of the things, because otherwise part of me wants to say, oh, like, people should be free to do what they want as long as they're not hurting anyone else. But then, yeah, they're like the edge cases where it's like, I don't want to be arguing defending that. But I think for me, that would probably help me decide better, like knowing what is the impact of doing horrible acts in VR. Does it actually change the way that I interact with others outside of that context?
And I just would say I would love to meet the people on the ethics committee approving that research, because it would be, I guess that's the only way, right, to attribute that, because I don't know how else you could do that in a public sense. You'd have to be monitoring people and then trying to correlate that with criminality in different cases. I would say there was an experience I had working with an idea for a project, because I'm a photogrammetrist by hobby and I do cultural heritage stuff on the side, and there is a synagogue in Ankara that is kind of abandoned, but it had a documentary, and there was an interest in doing a documentation and creating a spatialized version of this documentary. And they wanted to maybe disseminate it. They were looking at different business models. And I said, well, once you document it, and let's say we put it in Mozilla Hubs, and you want to distribute that, share that with your partners, it's a website. And it's a company's website, it's there. Anyone who has the URL is going to be able to go into an instance of that. And if it gets to the wrong people, they're going to do things you don't want in your digital synagogue. It's not harming the physical synagogue, but it's doing something. Where or do you fall in acceptability of that? And their thought was, we cannot accept it, so we won't document it. And that's just a choice. It's not to say that I would have probably have just gone with accepting that it's digital, because it's digital, it's not harming the physical one, and the physical one is what I prioritize. And in some abstract sense, someone could imagine harming it, and in some sense it's equivalent to the virtual experience. Even though it's not exactly equivalent, I still probably equate it closer to that. So to the specific example, I share your initial impulse, is that I would not want to regulate it and prohibit. And specific to avatars, at the event that was in Barcelona, the European Metaverse Research Network event, there was a speaker who said something I've heard a few different times, that you should not look, no one should ever look different than they physically do. You should always be absolutely identifiable. And practically speaking, you should not be able to escape, hide. You are you. And of course, in some sense, there's a certain privilege that comes with that type of statement. And it wasn't well received by the rest of the audience. But it's not the first time I've heard it. That person was representing, I think, not the commission, but something connected advisory to the commission. And I think this strong impulse that virtual worlds are fantasies, and we need to regulate what people's fantasies are, because they shouldn't be allowed to do things we don't like in their head or in some, and this is, we can't get into their head, but we can get into their virtual world.
Anything that you guys have done?
I'll just follow up the last one because I was at that conference and also disagreed with that particular speaker. That's a sort of, falls for the same problem that the Facebook real name thing had, that not everybody can present as themselves in the virtual world. I think the rule I'd have above the door is what's the rule inside this environment, right? Is it the Wild West, where you can't trust anything you see? Anybody can pretend to be anything, or are people coming as themselves? Because you can imagine on this extreme, it's courts of law, for example, right? So where people, real consequences, somebody is being tried for something, you appear as yourself, because the jury needs to see you in order to make a distinction about, are you telling the truth, right? Who is the most trustworthy witness in this court case? Whereas the Wild West is, I'm just living out a fantasy, and I'm dressing up to go there. So both will be allowed, but the key thing is that people know the rules before they go in, because that's what they elect in the real world, right? To choose one or the other, and they have a lot of freedom.
Okay, anything else you want to add, anyone? Other than that, I would see if there are more questions from the audience. Okay, here.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question about the consequences of VR technologies from the social point of view and from the point of view of individuals. So for example, in the future, this technology would be more widespread, more accessible, more people would use it not only for work, but also for leisure activities, for entertainment, more and more. And how would that, how would the society react? So will the society more integrated because people can speak to each other maybe and meet each other in these virtual worlds? Or maybe the society and individuals in this society would be more isolated, more and more, because they can speak and communicate with other people in these worlds, but they are just sitting in the room by itself alone. So I wanted to ask about this psychological maybe and social standpoint.
Okay, who wants to start?
I would maybe just highlight the sitting in the room. I mean, I don't sit in VR. So I mean, just because it's a certain image, a mental image of someone sat at a chair, maybe not in the best of health because they don't leave the room and they stay at their computer. And I just want to highlight that that's not, I would say very indicative of a VR experience, which should be quite active and for many people is. So I mean, that's not your point, but just because it's kind of implicit in the rejection of using immersive technologies as a connective medium. But I mean, I guess we're getting into the mixed reality world, and so the mixed reality world is like, actually, what's it going to be like when there are three of us here, but you can't see the third person, but I can see you both. Like for me, that's actually really going to be hard to assess how that affects, not because I'm isolated, but I'm more connected than other people because perhaps I have access to networks and resources that the other partners around me don't have. And I haven't really begun to really like ideate and brainstorm just how that's going to affect society when your wealth is not necessarily hidden, but it's going to be right out there and show. I guess you can have really nice clothes and it can also show it in the car. But again, practically speaking, like if I need to hail a cab, I mean, it already is, there's a socioeconomic division there. But again, just bringing it a little bit more, it's like, do you see this beautiful world that we're in? No, you don't. We're standing physically here, but you don't see it because you can't, because you don't have the resources that I have. That's going to be, I think, really interesting to see, and I haven't really started to put anything coherent as to what that might look like in the future. I
would say I am optimistic. in that the tools should be accessible and people should be able to make their own spaces. So if we end up in an environment where that type of division, that I can't see what you're seeing because it could be that somebody pays, a corporate pays for a certain experience to be relayed to people, and you can pay and subscribe for it. But hopefully it's easy enough that people can make their own content, that sort of exclusion of people from things which are awesome and fun is not a huge deal. There will be companies making things which are fun and awesome, but also we'll be making them for each other.
Anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably on a case-by-case basis where some people will feel more connected in VR because they're able to connect with people from back home. They're able to find people like them. And for other people, it may be more isolating if going in VR is like a comfort mechanism and going in VR is a way to avoid having to interact with your neighbors or anything like that. So much like the internet today, I think overall there's been more connectivity, but you could argue there have been individuals who maybe have been more isolated. So I don't know if society would change a lot. For me, probably one interesting aspect of this is like in VR, how good will generative AI and things like that be such that you don't know if the people you're interacting with in VR are people? Because I think in real life, robotics has not gone the way. I know you all human beings, at least I hope. But like in VR, I think it's easier to come up with realistic avatars that are all like AI generated. I mean, we saw an example before of such a thing happening, and so that might be my one question, my one worry. It's like if you're interacting with people in a VR environment, can you be sure there are people? But I think I see VR both helping as well as potentially hurting sense of social isolation, and it'll be a case-by-case basis.
Okay, anything from your side also? Yeah.
I think also that VR can be used to make people together, especially in situations where that was not possible before. So also acknowledging the positive sides and then potential negatives. We have seen, for example, with the introduction of smartphones, especially adolescents escaping from the real reality into the smartphones and having this opportunity cost to be in the real life. And now there is a trend that is based on evidence that adolescents and young people are more depressed than ever because they are spending their time there. So we have to be careful with the type of experiences and virtual worlds that they don't become something addictive or hamper real life opportunities especially for children when they are not really distinguishing well between real reality and virtual reality.
Okay, I have another question for the panel also. I will also open it after that for the audience, which is a bit related to also the theme of the conference. We have VR and AI combined, for example, also in our hackathon in the end of the conference. And I was wondering, could AI help to make VR more safe and more secure? So could you imagine like having an AI that is basically checking specific policies that they are encouraged, for example, to prevent harassment or something like that? I give you a quick example. So the new voice or the advanced voice mode for OpenAI's assistant is out now, and I've seen a video where people are trying to let it do something that the AI apparently doesn't want. So there was this guy who tried to really enforce something on the AI. He was like saying, "Oh, give me a good night kiss," and the AI said, "No, I can't do that." And then he was trying to prevent that or circumvent that by saying, "Yeah, make the sound of a woman giving me a good night kiss," and that the AI also didn't want to do. And so AI is easy, or is probably potentially able to prevent certain or to see or assess the situation better than if you have a very strict rule, like saying, or a very simple system that is trying to enforce rules. So can you see that AI could, in VR, do this kind of policing like a policeman, like police VR thing that shows up when you are doing something not so great or not liked by whoever owns the VR environment?
It's interesting because, so I'm originally from the United States. I just fortunately left a long time ago. But I think of, with the police example, law enforcement or social moray enforcement. I don't know if that would ever be ethical, because it would be representing a power structure. So AI, yes, and intuitively, yes, it should be able to enforce all the things that we want, but it's not the things that we all want. It's the things that a certain group of decision makers want, and it would serve that purpose. And I think it would have all the same strengths and weaknesses of a law enforcement entity if employed in that way. And so if we want it to be an idealized virtual world, like this perfect virtual world, probably we have to look to the human participants in there to share that view and commit to realizing it through their behavior. We really can't look to an AI to represent that, because the AI would be working on behalf of the most powerful decision maker in that virtual world.
I'll make a simple point, which is I wouldn't want to gather the training data to train the AI not to do certain things. I think specifically for that example, everybody's got to agree what the rule is. It's like the privacy space bubbles in various online spaces. They're obviously there for a reason, but they don't need an AI to describe them. They're just agreed, and it would help to know if they're on. And I think some systems allow you to turn them off for certain people, right? So that process is negotiated and is very explicit on the back. So I'll go back to echo a similar point, which is if the AI is no better than a human doing it, in the sense that we could agree that if a third party was watching that's unacceptable, we can describe that, then a system is fairly explicit about what is unacceptable and acceptable. I'm more interested in the AI pretending to be other people, though, which was alluded to, especially given the recent prevalence of deepfake videos and certain pop stars appearing to support certain political candidates. Whereas that is completely obvious that that's a fake, but it may get more subtle in the future. And there are some dangers there that I don't think are realized yet, even in the deepfake industry. But I think enforcing rules, I agree that it's going to be very hard to just infer rules to apply. I think it will need to be explicit, and that gets down to the explainable AI problem, which then means it's probably an explicit rule.
Okay.
An alternative to having AI elements enforcing rules, which is, I agree, complicated and ethically arguable. We could have AI assistants personal to the users, such that they can help the users protecting themselves. So I can talk to my assistant, ask what might be endangering for me in the virtual world, or what can be potentially privacy harmful, and then learn from the experience from my assistants and apply that in my way of navigating the world. So that to turn around into a different positive vision.
Yeah, and sort of to build up on that, because I think the approach has been like, oh, there is one world and there is one AI overlord that determines what people can and can't do. But you can imagine, yeah, kind of this idea of virtual assistant, maybe like I use this AI fairy that can view other people's interactions, and if there's someone who, I don't know, the AI perceives that it's going to come do me harm, they like block them from my view. And thus there might be positive because it's an AI fairy that I choose, that it only affects myself. Maybe you could say it affects the person trying to hurt me, but in this case, it only affects me. So that could maybe be a positive. But I do agree that having like one AI system is bad. First, they're just completely inaccurate, and they have all these flaws. And B, even if they worked well, who gets to enforce it? Is it accountable to anyone if it makes the wrong rules, etc.?
If I can follow, because that's an exciting point that I didn't think was going to come up, the idea of AI interacting with AI, and then for the purpose of trying to maybe outsmart or to, and so then is the AI going to identify an additional AI that's going to help it? And so, I mean, I do practically think that the amount of energy required to support and sustain the proliferation of AI directly engaging with each other, presumably on our behalf, but then just generations down the line, that's actually one of the elements of AI energy consumption that I don't think is really, I don't hear being discussed very much. Because coming back to that idea, it's like I would have like, imagine I have a virtual space and I'm not home. So you come to my virtual space, but you engage with an AI that represents me. But in this scenario, I can always be represented by an AI even when I am there. You don't get to the real me until you pass through an AI filter that's there. But then why would you engage with my AI filter? Your AI filter would engage with my AI filter. Like it just, yeah.
Yeah, that would be an interesting, like AIs talking, or maybe there's in the future more talking AIs amongst each other than with humans. Let's open the discussion for the audience. Are there questions relating to what was just said?
Let's say we implement such measure where we track people what they say. Cannot that be abused by like authoritarian governments? Like let's say it's China. Like you say we implement that, and then you can track what everybody said, and then, or like in Germany too. Like, and I think that. Always like legislation where it says, okay, we should track people that can always be abused by people, by governments. And I think the best way is like, I don't know, to let other users decide. Let's say I block this person, and if a person has 5 blocks from different users, then ban this person from the server. I think that's like a much simpler solution that using like a tracking AI and then, yeah, recording everything.
Okay, thanks. Does any one of you want to directly respond?
So to clarify, what you're asking is like, isn't a better solution like users themselves choose who to block rather than having an AI system decide for it?
Instead of recording everything.
I think. Yeah, I tend to agree. I will play devil's advocate and just play like one argument that people could make is like, it shouldn't be up to me to block. Like if someone's doing something bad to me, like if I'm suffering, do I have to go the extra effort to try to, like, you know, protect myself and like go out of their way? Even if I block, they might do it to others. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that would be a devil's advocate position of like, some people might say, if someone's harming me, like I'm already in a lot of distress, I shouldn't need to go out of my way to make sure that person's not harming me and not harming others.
Yeah. And I would follow up on that. I'm thinking of an example. Like there's a platform many of you maybe know called Resonite. And in that platform, you know, there are the discussions about do they make the UI easier to make it more accessible, or do they keep the difficulty level just high enough that it's not really worth anybody's effort to be trolling. But you have other examples. I know Museum of Other Realities. It cost $30 back in the day, and they said you can be a troll. When you get banned, you can go buy another $30 account. You know, if you want to keep paying to be a troll, you can be. That was their approach, and very few people would do that. So there are ways to kind of emphasize, like to make you know, this idea that the group can self-regulate, but then. What would banning mean? Because let's say, could I imagine that I took a position that wasn't popular in my community and I got banned simply because I wasn't popular? Yeah. Does that mean I was harassing, or I simply was a target of a mob mentality at a particular moment in time? That doesn't mean that I should still have access to where that group is. That group could say, we don't want this person here. But so then what is the ban? Is the ban from where one of those people are or some other distinct group is? Is it from the platform? Like in your case, like I got banned from one person's instance, but does that mean I get banned from all their friends' instances, or can I go to, you know, I can go other instances of spaces and still harass that same person through some other mechanism? Like, in practice, I think no one would disagree that if a group of people want to come together and say, we don't want that person here, that's reasonably a right, at least in a virtual sense. But it starts getting into the details as to what exactly is banning in that scenario, and what is it? What purpose? What objective is it serving?
Any other comments to that? Okay, let's see if there are other questions from the audience.
At first, thank you for your insights. My question would be, I wanted to know, what do you think AI technology right now, how important is it, generally speaking, for VR right now? And for the future, what do you think is the potential of AI considering VR? And my other question would be, what do you think is the biggest bottleneck right now in VR technology? Where you say that if we solve this, we would get a big leap in VR technology and for society and or economy. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to go first?
I'll go first with a relatively simple answer, which is that AI will help people create content for VR. In that a lot of the tools that we use are learnable but have interesting hard parameters in them. Take photogrammetry, for example, since it got mentioned. It's quite a specialist thing, but I think the increasing capability of the AI processes to guess the parameters and therefore get you good results will mean that's democratized in the sense that it's much more open. So I think the main thing that AI will do for VR is just make content creation a lot easier. Of course, that'll mean that you get a lot of copies of things. You just look at the Dreams product on PlayStation and what happened there, where you can't sell that content because lots of people made homages to things that already existed that had intellectual property attached to them. But it was great, right? I mean, it's a great platform and showed that the right set of tools can really enable a new class of description. So that's one of the things that we work on. Copyright still applies, right? So I'll make stuff, it'll become a little easier, and copyright and intellectual property may have to get a little bit more sophisticated. But there are laws about that already, so I think we'll not worry too much about the prevalence of copies of things, at least in the short term.
Okay, who else wants to go next? I mean, there were actually two questions that you also want to answer, but the next big thing in VR would be to push the whole thing then to the next level?
AI for content creation. That was my answer to both.
Okay, that was your answer to both.
Make it easier, right, so that you don't have to... I can construct a 3D environment from one photograph. Right? I can do that in the lab, and all those big VR companies, tech, computer vision groups are showing that at this year's conferences, is how to hallucinate whole models from single photographs or small numbers of photographs. So making things that I can share with my friends, family, and students and larger groups, I think is going to get a lot easier in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
So I would say that AI is, in the short horizon, incredibly important. Because if you don't have AI with your VR project or your XR project, you're not getting funding. So it's really important if you need money. But to invert it, one of the big talking points is that XR is where most people are going to have the fullest experience of various AI services, tools. It's going to be in a extension of their experience, either in a VR or in a mixed reality sense. So it's a very tight relationship, but right now I would say it's very transactional right now, because a lot of the AI tools are not yet where they need to be, I would say, to replace a process that someone who, and maybe not an expert, but at least someone who's proficient, who's put some time in, needs to still be involved. But it's getting there. But the thing that would maybe open things up the most, we still do not, as an industry, know how to market what takes place in a headset. We keep showing pictures of people in a headset. Like, if I want to sell the experience of travel on a plane, I'm going to show a picture of a plane, on the ground looking up. Like, imagine you're up. It's not a compelling communication of what it is. And I think we still are no closer collectively to knowing how to sell it as something really, the only one who you have to go put a headset on and say, you've got to see that. You've got to experience that. I had the best time. It was really effective for me. You know, it has to be one-to-one, but we haven't been able to communicate effectively what takes place when your reality is virtually enhanced in some way.
So I think AI and machine learning in general can be very valuable in making the most out of the multimodal sensors that are incorporated in headsets and having more tailored, personalized experiences, adapting to your cognitive load, to your preferences automatically, so you have the best of the possible experience. One potential case that, for example, we are investigating in my lab is using these sensors as biometrics, such that you can wear a headset and instead of inputting passwords or pins in the virtual world with the controls, which is pretty cumbersome, then you can just by a brain ID get in there and get access. So this type of biometric facilitated by machine learning can be some new valuable tools to the experience and make it more easy, user-friendly.
Yeah, I think for the AI, I agree with what other folks have said. In terms of the bottlenecks, I think two. One is bulkiness, I think. Even though headsets are getting thinner and thinner, I can't just pull it up like my smartphone. And I think if we had, there were recently the Orion glasses announced, but if it was something as simple as just being able to put glasses on, it'll make it a lot more portable and a lot more applications. And then this goes back to the other point, which is how to market this. I feel one of the problems with VR is, whenever I use VR, I think VR is cool, VR is fun. I don't need VR. Whereas I need my phone, I need my laptop. And I felt when these other technologies came by, it was very clearly one could see how it would be necessary. And I think for VR, it's not there yet. Maybe once it starts becoming a regular part of work, and it gets incorporated into work environments, and suddenly if it becomes part of your work, you need to become more familiar with it, you need to use these tools. Then maybe, but I don't think we've reached the stage where VR is absolutely essential to accomplish a task. And once we reach that point, or once VR makes something so convenient and easy that you can't really live without it, that will push for adoption.
Okay, thank you. We are almost at the end of the panel. I just wanted to have you all give a final statement, and the question for that will be, what do you think will be the long-term impact of VR on our society? So what will it be if that all works out, if we have a platform that everyone can use, small glasses that everyone can wear, some kind of policing mechanism that is good for everyone, or at least we are converging towards one. What will our society be then? Let's start with you, Anthony, and let's do the final round. Or do you need some time to think?
I'll give a naive answer. It'll be more fun. More entertainment, more socializing with people, more access to artistic endeavors. More fun.
And I'll echo that. I mean, I maybe sound, because I'm cynical perhaps about other people, but I make things with VR and with augmented reality and eventually mixed reality. I love the fact I can make incredible experiences. That motivates me. That's what I tell other people. You can make incredible things too. Other people I don't know what they're going to do. They might do things, but I try to stay out of it. That's why I'm a little bit more. I sound like I'm quite cynical about its ultimate impact on a society, but I really don't. That's not I'm more concerned about other people that I know, and it offers really tremendous things for them if they just take the time to learn how to live in there, to work with others, make things, and as that gets easier, they don't have to learn as much. It'll just be even easier to make that point. But you can do incredible things, and I think that's what attracts me and keeps me engaged with it. So.
I am very positive also about virtual reality and how we can get better by using it. Especially, I think one of the biggest potentials is in education or in training, in ways that you can not train or as easily train in real life. So I think we will get richer in terms of possibilities for collaboration and for education.
All right, I'll take a different track and just point to the dystopian land and how we can avoid it. Yeah, dystopian land is a lot more, assuming that we have a model similar to tech today where it's technology is dominated by one or only a few companies, you'll have a lot more of your life being controlled by the Metas, the Googles of the world, where now it's not just what's on your phone, but a lot of your forms of entertainment, this, that, the other, are controlled and can be taken away. But assuming we break those down, start the revolution, and have a more equitable, fair thing, then yeah, I agree with Anthony, it'll be much more fun.
Okay, thanks everybody for participating in this panel round. We are at the end now, and we will proceed with the next point on our agenda. I'm not sure what that is, but it's the coffee break, the most important of all things that could happen. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for participating, and yeah, I also positive, and I hope that we as a society will harness the good more than we are suffering the bad from this technology. And with this, I want to end the panel. Thank you.